Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast with Michael Becker and Paul Peebles. During this program, you will hear interviews with real-life successful investors who will share their stories and provide useful advice on how to acquire, finance, and operate apartment complexes. Now, here they are, Mike Becker and Paul Peebles.
Welcome to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Peebles, National Underwriter for Old Capital. And joining me today is Michael Becker.
Hey, Paul.
Always with Old Capital. So today we have in the podcast Bryan Amos. Bryan Amos. And when I talk about putting Humpty Dumpty back together, this is the guy who does it for us. So Bryan brings the physical due diligence when you get a property under contract or about to get a property under contract. He is the eyes and ears for you to kind of determine how much money do I need to put into this property? You know, what's working, what's not working? Does the HVAC work? How much more life does it have on it? So he is the eyes and ears for you to kind of physically know what's going on. So we're going to talk a little bit about physical due diligence with Bryan Amos. So Bryan, how are you doing?
Hey, Paul. Doing great.
Good. So Bryan, if someone were to ask you what physical due diligence is, what would you say?
Well, first, thanks, Paul, for having me today on the podcast. And when you talk about due diligence, it covers a lot of different areas, the financial due diligence, transactional due diligence. And so I handle the physical due diligence, everything that kind of makes the property work from top to bottom, from roof to foundation, and HVAC, electrical, the main characteristics of the property to make sure that, you know, you're budgeting correctly for any hidden items that might come up.
Maybe you start a little bit with your background. How did you get into the business, and how did you become an inspector, basically? What will lead you to that?
Right. I have a degree in engineering from Baylor University, and it's a general degree. It's actually both mechanical and electrical, and it served me well over the years. But I was in engineering for about 6 years, and I was at a startup thinking I was going to make the big bucks doing a high-speed technical communications job. And they pulled the funding around 2001 when the stock market went down. So kind of disillusioned with that field. At the same time, my older brother, who had done really well in engineering, wanted to start a real estate investment company, and I was fully on board with that. So in about the end of 2001, we started our own investment company doing single-family houses, doing renovations, and basically what you would call flipping. And during that process, we realized we were hiring our own GCs, hiring our own trades. And with my background in high-speed board design, I saw that we could improve this process. So we started taking over our own GC activities of the renovation, and then found that the process was much more smoother when we had more control over it.
Right.
Plus, we weren't giving someone 25% of our deal when we could manage it ourselves. In 2007, 2008, when the market started going down, my brother was less, interested in doing real estate and moved on to other things. But about at the same time, I had an investor friend of mine who had a distressed apartment under contract and wanted to know how to analyze the property. And we pulled together a lot of different due diligence criteria, looked at what worked based on my experience hands-on with residential and his experience with multifamily. We put together a comprehensive due diligence scope of work to go through. So since then, that's been refined and honed, and I bring in now a team of experts to look at a property. Over the last 6 years, I think we've done about 200 complexes, almost 20,000 units. So we've got our process down to a science almost.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a first-time apartment owner, someone aspiring, so tell us the most critical thing about why would someone hire an inspector? I mean, obviously, you need to go and understand what's going on in the property, but maybe you kind of say, why Bryan Amos, who uses you? Maybe tell us a little bit about, like, who's your typical client and why do they choose you?
Well, one of the things that I do is, first off, I'm a little bit different than a typical inspector, which does have, they have some value, and don't limit.
Meaning like an engineer that a bank would hire do like a physical
Correct.
needs assessment.
Right. So that's part of more sophisticated investors that I work with also use a bank inspector, and then I supplement. I am for the investor. So my background and what you're hiring me for is to be your eyes and ears on the ground for you.
Right.
For you as the investor.
And so how does what you do differ from what a bank hired inspector? So kind of like the methodology, what do they do versus what you do?
Right. The main thing is that, I can learn a lot about every aspect of due diligence, learn about the HVAC, the electrical, the plumbing, but I'm never going to outplumb a master plumber or, be superior than a master electrician who's actually in that field doing it every day. So that's who I bring in. So I bring in about 10 different trades who have built a relationship with my company, and we know we can trust to give me accurate what's wrong, and then the other side is how much does it cost.
And so the bank is going to bring in a generalist engineer to be responsible for the physical assessment of the property. The generalist, just like what Bryan was saying, he has a little bit of knowledge about roofing, a little bit of knowledge about plumbing, a little bit of knowledge about electricity and all kinds of stuff like that. And he's only going to do a sampling of the units. He's going to do maybe 10% of the units of actually physically looking in. So he represents the bank in doing a generalization of what the health and safety is that could be outstanding in the property, whether it's fence rails around a pool, is that the health and safety issues, is it stairs or rails. They're looking for any potential problems that the bank could get sued for. Bryan looks through the eyes of the investor. What happens on this property that the day that you take it over, what do I need to fix? What are the things that have to be cured? And Mike has a phrase that I think is excellent. And what are those two things that can put a property into the weeds very quickly, Mike, after you take it over?
Well, if you don't know, you don't do a good physical inspection, you don't know how much money things are going to cost, you have unexpected items that do, kind of pop up along the way. You don't have the capital set aside for them. That's a big one. Yeah.
So the two things is just like what Mike was saying, is that probably the biggest thing is that if you have no idea what your capital budget and you think that you can cure a lot of the problems through cash flow, you're absolutely incorrect. You got to fix all those physical problems up front. And the second thing is management, and having piss poor management is the thing that throws a lot of these properties into the weeds. So the thing that we're talking about today is really curing the physical problems in the property, and Bryan and his team help to identify the problems.
Right. And so just kind of wrap that point up, Paul. So one of the main differences between what a bank hired engineer and what Bryan does is the bank hired engineer, like you said, is just a generalist. He'll kind of look at all sample, select HVAC units and walk the exterior, but he'll only go into say 8 or 10% of the units, where Bryan's team will walk every unit. And so when the seller's selling you the properties, he's probably not going to show you the one with black mold. So that's why you got to walk every one of the units. So when you're out there looking for stuff, what are you looking for? Or what's going to maybe quickly talk through maybe a methodology and how you tackle inspecting a property, and maybe what are some of the common issues that pop up along the way?
Right. So when we show up at a property, if someone's not expecting kind of our approach, because we bring a team of people, we have about 10 different trades out there. And sometimes the seller's a little bit overwhelmed on how many people are going through the property. But we look at the roof is, of course, a big criteria to look at very closely. Foundation, we look at the sewer line and the plumbing. And since you can't see that from the ground, we actually camera a sample of lines, depending on how big the property is. We try to get a really good sample to fill for are there any roots in the line and breaks in the line? How have they been maintaining that property is also fairly important. Domestic hot water, how much servicing has been done recently. You can tell, how well the maintenance team, or if they have a service contract, how well these main systems are operating, along with HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, air conditioning. Most typically in Texas, they have split systems with a condenser on the outside and an air handler on the inside, or a chiller system, 2-pipe chiller system. So we bring in experts in each of these fields.
A lot of people are not familiar with what a 2-pipe chiller is. What is a 2-pipe chiller?
Well, it's actually a very efficient way of heating and cooling your property. And they have a condenser unit on the outside of the property or outside the building. That's a large device, cools water, and that chilled water actually goes through all of the interior units, and a fan coil blows over across the evaporator coil to cool the units. Conversely, when you switch over to heat, you'll have a hydronic boiler in a mechanical room that will heat the water, and that water will go through all of the units and reverse process. That hot air will blow through the units.
So can you have hot water one day and cold water the next?
Unfortunately, no. You do have to change it over, and so they do that oftentimes in the spring. They'll turn on your cooling side of your chiller system, and then in the winter, they will switch over to the hydronic boiler.
So what are some of the most common issues that when you're walking these properties that you see here, and most everything you do is in DFW? So what are some of the common physical issues you find walking 70s and 80s built properties?
Right. A lot of it can be electrical, aluminum wiring. We come across that a lot. And then aluminum wiring that hasn't been correctly modified. Right. So as codes change over the last few decades, there are different approved methods. And so maybe they had an older method in the 80s that's not really accepted now. And certain lenders or insurance companies may push back against that. So that's stuff we find that you can't really see on the surface when you're first walking a unit. And then another thing is not properly servicing those 2-pipe chillers, that they're on their last leg. I just recently walked a property that only one stage was working. So the owner said, everything's great, right? It's running, everything's fine. But it's just about 85 degrees now in DFW. When it comes to good old August, 105 degrees,
sure,
that second stage needs to kick in, and it won't be able to do that. So, of course, he'll have sold the property at that time, and then,
next guy's problem, right?
Next guy's problem, for sure.
What are some of the things that people miss? So, like when you're walking, when you're even say I'm a pretty reasonably experienced ownership group, and what are some of the things that you just might not see when you're walking that are kind of hidden? I mean, obviously the sewer system is one that you have to put a camera down. Is there anything else that's kind of a sneaky thing that catches up to people along the way?
Different types of roofs can cause problems over time. It's very common to have an older property that has a flat roof, and how they installed a new roof or how they did repairs is often a problem that you can't really find until you get up there and actually physically look at it and see how they did their seams, how they did their corners, how are the air conditioning units on the roof. A lot of times we find the AC guy will cause roof damage that they thought it was a roof issue and is really an AC issue caused. So those are the typical things we come across.
Maybe what are some of the newer things that you kind of come across that are kind of more recent, that have been some issues that maybe you haven't experienced in the past?
Right. One of the things that we're facing now is that the federal government is phasing out R22 refrigerant, and so we're moving to 410A, and so you have to change your systems.
Your right? HVAC systems?
Correct, yeah. Right. To work with the new refrigerant, and that's an additional cost that now a new owner is going to need to calculate in his holding costs.
Let's go back to the beginning itself. When does a client call you? Do they call you after the property's under contract? Do they call you before the property goes under contract? Tell me a little bit about the timing of where you get engaged into this deal.
Well, what's funny with how this business has grown for me is, like I said, it started with an investor and mine coming together and working on what due diligence actually works for an investor. And that has grown from word of mouth to investor to another investor, and people like yourself at Old Capital who like what we do. And now, so I do.
No, we don't like it. We love what you do because your reports are 110, 130 pages, very complete, lots of pictures. It tells us exactly what the story is of the physical needs of the property, the things that are deficient upon the property. He has all the vendors, whether it's an HVAC person that actually physically takes a look at all the compressors on the property, takes a look at all the fans on the property, takes a look at the driveways and the sidewalks, to take a look at there's any slip and fall issues on the property, takes a look at everything, and then assembles this huge vendor report and kind of breaks it down what the costs are to fix these problems. Because I'm a banker by trade, but I can't tell you what a roof is going to cost to replace. But when Bryan brings on a roofer to the property, we actually have a written bid on what it's going to cost to get this replaced. And we take that written bid, whether it's the roof or the driveway or the HVAC or the interiors to the fixtures in the property, whether it's the hot water, the dishwasher or everything in the property. He gives us kind of a breakdown list. So he goes through every unit. Not only takes a picture kind of the interior, but tells us, kind of breaks it down to, the age, what needs to be replaced, how are the carpets, what's going on, what the problem is. And then he puts this report together and kind of tallies exactly how much money it's going to take to cure, whether it is $100,000, $300,000, what that is on a per door basis. We've got to know that. You've got to know that. You've got to be able to take a look at that and tell the seller of that property, well, these are the physical things that we did not see when we walked the property the first time. And we made an offer on the property based on what we thought it was going to be like. But when we actually got our engineer on the property, and these are the vendors that were brought in, and these are not our vendors, but they are vendors, and they're telling us that these are the things that need to be fixed. Either we're going to have to pay for it, or you're going to have to lower the price of the property. So they really are an advocate for you, the investor. Anything to add to that, Mike, at all?
No, I think it's pretty good.
Well, one of the things that people may be reluctant to, they have a choice of using any vendor that they want to. These are my preferred vendors that I've worked with, some about 6 years. And their experience, we know that they're fair and honest, but you're in no obligation to use them. So you pay me a package price and I bring in all my team, but then again, you're able to use that, sometimes they're the best bid, and other times you use it, you can shop it around. So you're under no obligation to use these vendors, but they are handpicked by me to give me the best viewpoint into the property.
Sure, yeah. So you've done tens and tens of thousand units now. You walked them and dealt with many different investors. So what are some of from your perspective? What are some of the characteristics that separates like a successful multifamily owner investor versus some guys you see can kind of come and go and flame out? Right.
So I deal with all levels of investor. From the first one starting out to very experienced, and this is their 30th deal that they've done over the last couple of years here in DFW. And what I've seen is that the more experienced investors are willing, one, that know due diligence is a real cost that they need to incur to really investigate the property. A lot of the newer investors, they're a little bit concerned about spending upfront money on a deal that they may not do. Well, that's part of the process in apartment investing, is that you may need to kick a few tires before you actually get a deal to take down. And so what I see is the most successful investors use me time and time again to handle the physical due diligence side of it for them while they can handle the transactional side and do the underwriting.
Yeah, we can't be experts on everything. So, we're experts on the lending side. There's experts on the management side. There's experts on everything. But Bryan and his team are experts of kind of finding out what's under the rock, of what the problems can be that you're going to be faced with as soon as we close on that loan and we give you the keys. So you get the keys on Monday. What kind of things are you going to be faced with? I got to know that as an owner. I got to know that as the bank, as the lender in the deal.
It's like we always talk about. It's like a team sport, right? So Bryan's a member of your team. Old Capital could be a member of your team, and your management company, your lawyer, your accountant, et cetera. So that's certainly, Bryan's a guy that I've used many times now to do pretty much every deal that we've done. We've hired Bryan to come do our inspections, and it just gives a good peace of mind that we're walking into it. We know that we have 99% of the things that, could be known that we know, and we have a good budget put together and capital set aside. And, if we miss something, it won't be anything overly critical along the way, right?
Right. One of the things you mentioned is that we go into all the units. And that's one thing we really strive to do, is go into 100% of those units, because even though if it's an A-class property or a C-, even a D, you really don't know what's behind that door until you get in the unit. And you may have a grandmother wanting to give you milk and cookies when you show up and go through your inspection. And you might have just had just a drug flop house. You're surprised when you come through the door that they have all their paraphernalia out there and for you to see. You have everything from all grades of lifestyle that you come, once you go behind that door and you see really what's going on at the property.
Speaking of that, so kind of transitioning a little bit, we always like to see if people on the podcast have a funny story about something that they've encountered. And so you walking into tens and tens of thousands of units, like what's some of the crazier couple of things that you've seen that really like you couldn't believe that you're watching it?
Well, I don't know if this is funny for me from my perspective, but I was at a property in Dallas. It shall be left unnamed, but as we were going around the exterior, one of the guys goes, "Hey," he whispered over to me. And a lot of times the tenant just wants someone to bend their ear, to listen to their complaints, because a lot of times these are neglected properties. And so they want to kind of vent as you go through and do your inspection. And we're kind of used to that. So, okay, I thought he had something to say that was, tell me about some deferred maintenance on the property. Well, he invited me into his apartment and said, "Okay, here's what I got." And he shut the door and he propositioned me. I was like, now this was, I'm a rather, average sized white guy. And this is a very large black guy. And I looked up at him and I was like, "Sorry, thanks. I don't need to inspect that at all." So you come across all kinds of different things when you're going through these properties.
I was on a property with Bryan back about 3-4 months ago, and we were walking through a property up in Denton that we were going to make a loan on the property, and I just happened to be with him to do the physical inspection of the property. And it's a nice property. It has some ponds in front of the property, very nice property. And then I look over in the front living room of the property. And what do I see in the front living room? In a fish tank about the size of maybe 2 feet, 2.5 feet by 12 inches or something like that. If you remember this, we saw 2 large ducks, average male ducks in this big fish pond in the front of their living room. So you see some interesting stuff when you have somebody walk every unit. I mean, a lot of the investors that we come across, they're engineers or they're doctors or they're attorneys or they're just everyday Joes, but they don't know what to look for on some of these properties. So, if you have somebody that's been doing it for the number of years that you've been doing it and the number of properties that you've walked, the number of units that you've knocked on the door and looked through the property, you kind of have an idea what the costs are going to be to fix this, what's important, what's not important, and you have the eye to do it. I don't have the eye to do it. We rely upon a professional to do it. A $40,000 or $50,000 mistake should have been caught on the front side of these deals. That's 10 times what you would pay for the physical due diligence if you just had looked at it with somebody on the front side right.
Right. One of the things we do when we walk through the interiors, we have an 85-point checklist that we go through. And my guys use iPads, which is not new anymore. But how we've set it up is where we can capture a lot of information quickly, where my guys are just doing check marks, but it's actually inputting the data of how much the carpet's going to cost, how much the countertop to resurface. Instead of typing that in and taking a lot of time, we can actually capture a lot of data very fast and be very accurate at the same time.
Yeah, a lot of these owners are very proud of their properties. They think that it's a castle, just absolutely gorgeous property that they bought, and then they have somebody like you come on the property and you say, with the reality eyes looking at these deals, like, it ain't a castle, buddy. It's a nice property, but there's some physical problems with this property, and you're the one taking the pictures of the property and showing it to them, and really widens their eyes of the problems that they have, that if somebody doesn't buy this property, the seller is going to be forced to fix the property. So it kind of gives them a reason why to sell the property once they physically see the problems that they currently have.
One of the things you mentioned is that we use a lot of pictures. And so a typical inspection, their pictures are kind of small, kind of at the back of the appendix. And I would like my report to be easily understood. And so really just if you look at the pictures, it should tell the story of the property. And it should highlight all the major issues just by looking at visually. And so that kind of supersedes any argument by the seller when you can show the reality, because we're not there to make up anything. We're just revealing what's already there. And so when we can show the foundation beam is broken, we can show that the chiller is leaking water, that's pretty compelling evidence that we found, and then apply a number to that to cure the
issues, right? Yeah. So kind of wrapping up here, and we talked quite a bit about the fact that you guys do the physical inspections for multifamily, but you also do a little bit of construction management as well.
Right. So for due diligence, my company's Omni Assessment. It's Omni Assessment, and that's part of the Omni Group. So I'm the principal in Omni Group, and where we're actively looking for syndications. So we put deals together just like other investors. And we offer construction management services, and then we do this full service due diligence. So we're in the game with you to be on your side, and we're your advocate. But we also have the same eyes as an investor.
I was just going to say about what is this construction management? I don't think a lot of people know what construction management is all about. What does that mean?
Well, it came from my engineering background and knowing that process matters, so that you can, have a great plan to do a renovation, but if it's not executed properly, things can fall apart pretty quickly. So what I do for construction management is provide that streamlined process to what's going where, how much, and when, and then manage that throughout the renovation. So I do that for investors. I do that for other clients to make sure that once we've done the due diligence, now we can execute the renovation plan. So I do that as well.
So what's the first thing that people usually start on when they're rehabbing a property? What's the first thing?
Well, the first thing they should start on are plumbing and foundation repairs. So you don't want to be fixing your roof or fixing your interiors and then come in and do your foundation, because unfortunately it's pretty common in North Texas to have elastic soil that you need to take care of first. So take care of your foundation, your plumbing, and then start doing your interior and your roofing repairs afterwards.
That's great. So if someone wants to reach out to you and get a hold of you, what's a good type of client for you? One, maybe kind of tell what you're looking for, and then if they fit that kind of box, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Right. Since I do use a team approach, it really may not make sense to use my company on a smaller property, say 10, 12 units, and you're bringing 10, 12 trades out there. It's kind of overkill. So generally 50 units and above, we can do anything up to 400, 500 units. That's not a problem. It's generally on the lower side. It just doesn't make sense to bring in a full team. But my average property that I do is about $5,000 for my cost, and a little bit under or a little bit more than that, depending on the size of the property. And typically it's about 100 to 200 units, right in that range.
And how long does it take you to do it, and what areas do you do it in?
Depending on the size. We generally can walk 70 units in a day, and then put two guys on it. We can do 140 units in a day, but we could do almost everything in 1 to 2 days. 3 days if it's an unusually large property, but generally 1 to 2 days. Everybody's on site, everybody at once, and so we're not bothering the property multiple times, because that's part of my job, is to coordinate all these different vendors to be there on time and do their job. Then it takes me a little bit more time to get those bids back from the vendors. So 5 to 6 to 7 days is not unusual, depending on, if you're a substantial roof bid or foundation, they need a little bit more time. So I take a little bit more time than a typical inspection would, but yet when you're done in about 8, 9 days, 10 days at the most, generally, we put together a pretty comprehensive report.
So Mike, you own a lot of multifamily properties. How long do you usually ask for physical due diligence before you go into the loan application and start applying for financing?
So what I do at this point, I've done a number of deals, so I got a reasonably experienced eye at this point. So I can see most of the major obvious things. Obviously, I'll have a pretty decent idea that there may be some issues, but usually we either while we're negotiating the contract, if we're in the access agreement, I'll have Bryan come out and walk units, or if we're in their contract, during inspection period, I'll have Bryan come out, day one. I always try to get it scheduled where the first day I have it, he's out there so I don't lose any time. And usually what I do is once I have a kind of quick little wrap-up call with them, have a verbal, When he's done that same day or his last day on the property, he tells me, hey, here's high level of what's going on. As long as there's no deal killers and that's within my budget, I apply for a loan and I go, and then I get his report to follow up, a week or 10 days later after that. So that's what I do, Paul.
One of the things I found that when residential investors are moving to multifamily, they're used to a 3-day inspection period, a 7-day inspection period, and it's really not sufficient to give you accurate pricing to really go through a multifamily project. So I would encourage newer investors, fight for that 21-day to 30-day due diligence period that you have, and you can do other things during that time, but that gives us enough time to really know what's going on at the property.
All right. Well, sounds good. Bryan, thanks for coming into the Old Capital podcast. Anything more to add to it?
Yeah, maybe just make sure you give everyone the best way to contact you.
The best way to reach me is my website is Omni Assessment. That's OMNI ASSESSMENT, omniassessment.com. And email me at Bryan Amos at omniassessment.com. Also, my cell phone number is 214-755-5921. That's 214-755-5921.
That's perfect. Bryan, thanks for coming in, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Old Capital Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at oldcapitallending.com to sign up for our weekly email updates. We'll see you here next week with another great interview. Thank you for listening to the Old Capital